can the right wing and the left wing ever talk to each other again in this country? I'm trying, and it has been spotty. So we're gonna bring on an expert here to help us figure this out. The book is called Let's Agree to Disagree, A Critical Thinking Guide to Communication, Conflict Management, and Critical Media Literacy. It's written by Nolan Higdon and Mickey Huff. And Dr. Higdon, who is a professor of history, media studies, and education, joins us now. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on.
No problem. All right, so let's start in politics, of course. And so both sides have agreed to hate each other now, more than just simple disagreement. What do you think is the root cause of that?
I think there's a lot of factors at play, but one of the things Mickey Huff and I definitely focus on in the book is media. Starting with cable news and then internet, a lot of news outlets found out that being very divisive and creating caricatures of the quote unquote other side was good for profits. People would tune in to cheer for the good guy, that is their team or party, and boo the bad guy, which is the other party. And what it ultimately developed is we ended up with a nation where we hate a caricature of the other side, and we're comfortable dismissing half the country, and that's simply just not sustainable if you want to have a democracy. Democracy necessitates reaching out across ideological lines, trying to work where we can. And right now, polls show we're at the opposite, as you point out. Americans, number one fear in some polls is other Americans, and you simply can't have a democracy when we fear each other to that degree.
Yeah, so I think that there are actually three different parties involved. There's right-wing media, liberal media, and that's where I think most right-wingers would say that's the great majority of media. No, I think left-wing media is near minuscule. Like, it's us and a number of people that are online, basically. But mainstream media is not liberal media, it is corporate media. And so I think that that's a different ball of wax entirely, and actually is a huge part of the answer here. But first, I want to talk about right, left that you mentioned there. So in the beginning, we had the three networks, ABC, CBS, NBC. They're trying to reach everybody. So they're trying to do programming that'll appeal to both Republicans and Democrats. Fox News comes along, having seen your book, then the discussions you've had recently. So then, at that point, they create a niche, as you explain. But before I even get to the corporate guys, Nolan, that then necessitates a response, right? And I can tell you from my perspective, and then get your thoughts on it. As when we started the Young Turks 21 years ago, I was very loud, and I'm still loud today. Why? Because none of the Democratic politicians were loud. None of them fought for our side. So as Rush Limbaugh and Fox News and Republican politicians were eviscerating the left, we at the Young Turks felt the necessity to fight back, and not to fight back in the NPR way where you whisper and then play a little banjo in the background. But if they're gonna punch us in the face, we should punch them in the face politically. So once one side starts, it becomes a little inevitable, doesn't it?
This back and forth mentality can be somewhat inevitable, but we need to keep our eye on the ball here. I mean, the ultimate goal of democracies is to find ways to make the country more livable for the people. That is to fight for policies that serve the people. So much of our discourse in corporate media or legacy media seems to fixate on just destroying the other side versus actually trying to champion policies. And I think what you're talking about is an interesting trend we see in new media, which is a place where I'm optimistic. I mean, new media is kind of an outdated phrase, as we've had digital news now for 20 years. But this new media refers to this digital era. And I think in the digital era, we're seeing people experiment with the things you talk about, focus on policies, try and bridge gaps, and audiences are gravitating toward those types of programs. And so I think it's an indication that the media has long been giving us a inaccurate picture of the way the country feels about each other. And we go to some of these digital new media spaces, we realize that, yeah, we can, disagree on issue 1, 2, and 3, but we don't leave the table hating each other or fearing each other. And I think that's kind of the exciting promise of what we see in the digital space right now.
Well, look, so the digital era has its own issues. And so I'm not one who thinks, oh, it's all bad, as mainstream media says, 24/7. I think that it's got a great side to it. We got rid of the gatekeepers, and that allowed a lot of new voices in, and untraditional voices, unorthodox voices. It added to, and non-corporate voices. That's the most important part, right? And so now, having said that, Nolan, there's a new phenomenon in online media that is also greatly damaging, which is partly audience capture. So if you are on the right and you're not maximum right, the audience gets furious with you and wants to leave, and they want to find a show that's more pure, right? And on the left now, the same thing is developed. You have to be perfectly pure, whatever the hell that means, on an orthodoxy no one voted on, no one agreed to, right? But if you veer, as we've seen at TYT, if you veer a little bit from that orthodoxy, it's not the right that's gonna chop your head off, it's the left, right? And so the online, those forces are also driving us not apart, but to extremes. You must be 100% left, again, by definitions no one agreed to, or 100% right by definitions no one agreed to. So, boy, that makes our challenge super hard, doesn't it?
It does, and I think that's always been a problem that's faced democracies in the U.S. to one degree or another. I'll agree that the digital technologies certainly add new complications, but that's part of the why we wrote this book. It's to remind people that democracy is a 24-hour-a-day job, and if you want to see people who are captured in those spaces open their mind and potentially even collaborate with you on policy, you've got to do the work to reach out to these folks. You've got to try and reach them on a human level, not you personally, but all of us, myself included. And what we see happening over and over again is something I fear, which is where we try and run from each other, dismiss each other, censor each other, silence each other. And again, that's simply just not sustainable in a democracy. We have to find a way to reach out to each other. And insults and attacking the other side or hammering them back, it can feel good, but there's not a lot of evidence to show that actually changes minds or build coalitions, which are necessary for achieving policy in a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, look, on the reaching out, I totally agree, and that's what I'm in the middle of doing now, going on some right-wing shows. We'll go on some left-wing shows, including ones that disagree with us, and we're gonna mix it up. And so, I don't agree with some of the culture out there now in online media that says you shouldn't go on each other's shows because that's platforming people. Well, how are we gonna talk to them if we don't? And besides which, I'm going on their show. How could I'm not platforming them. And by the way, I don't mind them coming on our show. We've had Alex Jones and he's had me, and that was over a decade ago. And yeah, and then by the way, then Alex Jones went too far, and I wouldn't have Nick Fuentes on the show. You can draw lines, right? But I had David Duke on the show, not because I agreed with him, not because I wanted to reach out to him, but because I wanted to find out what the hell are these crazy people thinking, right? I've had QAnon people on the show because I need to find out where the hell did they get these crazy ideas, right? So, but right now there is an ethos where it says, don't even have the conversations. Having the conversations is in and of itself bad. But when you have the conversations, you don't have to cede ground. You could keep your own positions and have a conversation back and forth about those. So on all that stuff, I agree with you. On the other hand, there is one part I disagree with you on, out of the things that you just said. No, hitting the other side definitely works. And the example I'll give you is the Republicans. So for some period of time, I'd say about 2 decades or so, all right-wing media hit the left with no response from the left, none, zero. Democratic politicians laid down like doormats and kept saying the Republicans were right about everything. There was no actual left-wing media. There's none on television, none. It required the internet, it required Young Turks, and then thousands of other people doing it from their homes, etc. So, and they did great damage, Nolan. And it worked. They took a position like extreme right-wing ideology, which I don't think is very fact-based or logic-based, and they pretended the left was unintelligent. I mean, hilarious as they attacked education. And so their attacks on the left absolutely worked. And so is my attacks on the right working? I don't know. I mean, we got 2 generations who grew up online, and they hate. And they don't like the Republicans for their policy positions, so that worked too.
Yeah, I think it'll work in terms of maybe getting the next generation of a distaste for a particular political party. But when I say work, it's not just raising people's awareness about the problems with that party. I agree that the work that the left does, especially in new media, can be very helpful in that space. But I'm talking about building, coalitions to pass actual policy. It's one thing to get people to have a disdain for the Republican Party, but to achieve like a $15 minimum wage or universal health care, that's going to take more than like owning the conservatives online, right? It's going to take some strategic coalition building and pressure points and things like that. And if we dismiss large swaths of the country, it makes that simply impossible. So I agree with you that yes, it has an effect, certainly hammering and calling out the absurdities of one political party or another, or in the case of the right wing, fabricating things in sometimes. But actually passing policy, I think it necessitates more working together, and our political climate and a lot of our legacy media system has told us the opposite. It's divided us, told us we need to work together, we need to own the libs or destroy the conservatives and things like this that simply just aren't constructive.
So Nolan, that gets us to the very, very core of the problem, in my opinion, and I'm curious what you think about this. I think that we live under corporate rule, and that corporate media is mainstream media and right-wing media together, and that they play good cop, bad cop on us, and that they only disagree on social issues and culture war issues. And that the minute you get into economic issues, all of a sudden they all agree. Fox News hated the student debt relief, but so did CNN, and so did MSNBC. They had almost all their anchors speak out against it. So no one liked $15 minimum wage. No one spoke positively about it on cable news. No one argued for a paid family leave, even though it has 84% popularity. So I think that they are corporate interests that are both paying off our politicians, very literally bribing them. They're called campaign contributions, but they give them billions of dollars, both to corporate Democrats and corporate Republicans, and to mainstream media and right-wing media. They fund all of that to get us to fight, to hate each other, and to only focus on our disagreements and never focus on our agreements, because our agreements are almost all economic and against their corporate interests.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and this has been a frustrating part as someone who comes from California and is a lefty professor. If you casually throw out the way the right wing weaponizes ideas of like freedom or liberty or the working class, most left-leaning people I talk to will say, of course they weaponize those things. They don't actually advocate for policy to achieve those goals. But you point out that the same thing happens in Democratic circles. Like Democratic media will advocate in being anti-racist or pro-immigrant or for gender equity and things like this. But beyond trying to diversify the elites in the party, they don't really do a lot of policy for the bread and butter, nuts and bolts issues for people who fit into those identity groups. And so, to your point, I think there's a lot of rhetoric that we can gravitate toward from Democratic media if we're on the left, but the policy or the commitment to those issues is waning. And I think we get so distracted by the rhetoric and division, as you just described it, that a lot of times we don't keep our eye on the ball here about, well, where is it that we do agree? What is it that these parties are not doing for us? What is it we want these parties to do?
Yeah, so Nolan, I only have one prayer here, and let me run it by you and see what you think. And it's gonna sound self-serving, but it isn't. Let me explain. So look, let's take $15 minimum wage, because I'm attempting to bring people together on paid family leave, and there I actually think there's some hope, because 74% of Republicans want it, 84% of the country wants it, and it's about moms and them having time off, et cetera. So I think maybe we can unite on paid family leave. At the end of the day, the ultimate goal is to unite against corruption, so that we fight against corporate rule together. The right wingers who hate corporate rule and the left wingers who hate corporate rule, et cetera. So that's the ultimate goal, but that's very, very difficult. In order to get there, we've got to build up some forms of agreement. So all that is the agreement with you, that's the path we have to take, right? But when you get to something that isn't quite as easy as paid family leave, you get to $15 minimum wage. Our issue is not the Republican voters at all. They're totally on our side. That is why that has passed as a ballot measure in Florida, Missouri, Arkansas. It doesn't matter how red the state is. If you take it to the voters, Republican voters vote yes like Democratic voters do, because it gives them higher wages at the expense of corporate rule, right? So, but when you go, if I go to try the same thing I'm trying with paid family leave with $15 minimum wage, I think all of right-wing media is going to say no, because they're paid by corporate interests, and corporate interests definitely don't want it. And all of mainstream media is gonna say no, because they're paid by corporate interests and they definitely don't want it. So they're going to ironically unify against the American people. So that's almost that seems to be an indisputable fact. So how do we get past that giant boulder of misleading propaganda by corporate media?
Well, I think it necessitates, again, building that coalition around certain issues. And like you said, I think $15 minimum wage is and will remain a popular issue. But one of the things stopping people is if you're from the right, so many people on the right will never support Joe Biden doing a $15 minimum wage, just like I imagine some people on the left wouldn't support Trump doing it. And I think part of these conversations I'm advocating for people to have is we need to remind ourselves of what democracy is. You don't vote a person in so you can then defend them endlessly. You vote in the person you think you have the best shot of agitating and annoying to get to do what you want. So if you lean left, you vote in Biden so you can protest Biden every single day to demand a $15 minimum wage, and you may have to stand with right wingers who are doing the same. Same thing on the right. If you get Donald Trump elected to president, you don't wear a MAGA hat and defend him. You protest and agitate him to do the policies that he said he would implement, and you may need to stand with left wingers to do it. And so I think as these conversations need to overcome is this division. But part of that is a credibility issue. Like you mentioned corruption earlier. If you're anti-corruption, you need to call out corruption in the Trump years and call out corruption in the Biden years. And when you do that, people around you will recognize this is a credible person. This is someone I may not like where they stand on issues, but I know that they're principled. And I think that's like an invaluable trait that we've really lost as we've gotten into this hyper divisive culture where we're so focused on making sure we cheer on our team and defend them that we don't really pay too much attention to what policies we could be achieving if we actually united together and stopped defending some of these folks.
Yeah, so look, I don't think the Republicans are ever gonna propose $15 minimum wage, so that's not the best example, and Trump thinks there should be no minimum wage at all. But your overall point is really well taken because Trump and Biden's immigration policies are near identical. And yet when Trump did it, the left was like monster, keeping kids in cages, the worst human being alive. When Joe Biden does it, they're like, no, it's no problem at all. He's an angel. Mitch McConnell takes $1 billion in campaign contributions. He's a devil. Nancy Pelosi takes $1 billion in campaign contributions. She's the angel. It's absurd, totally absurd, right? So I agree with all that. Now comes the self-serving part. Look, since I can't, like you talking about elections, right? But we can't get to the elections and electing the right people without media, because media skews things so much. People have no idea what they're voting on because they heard a bunch of garbage from corporate media that totally perverted what the reality is, right? And so that's how, that's mainstream media 101 is to get Democrats to vote against their own interests in primaries. Like, oh no, you don't want the guy who agrees with you on Medicare for all and higher minimum wage and paid family leave. Boo, he can't win, he's terrible, he's a radical, right? And you can't get past them because there's a wall of propaganda, and unfortunately good people are tricked by that propaganda. So since I can't get past them, and then I go to the right-wing media and they're in the same team economically, right? My idea is for TYT, our network, and other networks like it to grow so large that people copy us and go, oh, maybe we can have conversations and be a large media network. Maybe it'll pay off to actually be open-minded and say, like for me, like working with Matt Gaetz and Ted Cruz, as long as they are on the same issues, same side policy-wise, why would I say no? Like people are this visceral hatred, like, oh, Matt Gaetz is in favor of it, then I hate it. Hold on, you don't even know what it is, right? Matt Gaetz actually is terrible on 98% of issues, but had 4 anti-corruption bills that were so good that AOC co-sponsored them. So, right, and it's not, it doesn't happen that often, but at the state level, actually it does. They actually do hate corruption. The Republican voters hate corruption. We can get agreement with the Republicans, but the media has to be large enough, successful enough for others to copy it. If they're not copying us and we just, we got big and we made a lot of money and we pushed our agenda and we affected some people, but we didn't get anybody else to copy us, in my opinion, it's not gonna work. You see what I'm saying? You kind of have to win the media game in order to get to the right place.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you on this. And I think, especially over the last 15, 20 years, a lot of work has been done by folks like you just described and like yourself, where you see the creation of these podcasts and streaming services and platforms that are drawing huge audiences that actually are competing with the primetime audiences for cable news. And at the same time, we see a decline in subscribers to legacy media newspapers, and we see a decline in primetime cable news viewers. So audiences are already gravitating toward these new media spaces. And as long as these new media spaces offer that in-depth, critically thought out debates and interesting guests and interesting ideas in constructive ways, I think there's a lot of meat on the bone. And I think those in legacy media are aware of what's happening, because remember, for years they told us, like, audiences want high broadcast quality, but people are tuned into podcasts from like People's Garage, or they were told like, oh, audiences have short attention spans, only talk in quick sentences. They're tuned into like 3-hour podcasts to listen to someone talk about some like ancient civilization or something. This new media space has demonstrated that a lot of the conventional wisdom of legacy media doesn't hold up. And when I see, these attacks, they'll say these vague terms like, oh, known disinformation outlets, or we got to watch social media, we got to watch YouTube. That's really their way of saying like, we need to get rid of these competitors, and they try and attack those competitors in their audience's mind, which is a problem, but it's also a good sign. If they're spending the capital to attack new media, that means new media is actually a competitor that they're afraid of. So I think what you're describing, we're in the middle of seeing it happen. And another just kind of footnote on that, candidates like Biden, and I know this is true in Trump's campaign right now, they're reaching out to some of these new media spaces to do interviews. And that's something Biden wouldn't have done 4 years ago. And so I think we're starting to see the vision you're talking about come to fruition.
Yeah, and I lived through it. I mean, we were the very first partner for YouTube, and so when we first started, when we told people we're on YouTube, they said, "Oh, you do cat videos?" And so in mainstream media, all they get big belly laughs. No one minded, no one attacked you, no one bothered, right? And then as YouTube started taking off, all of a sudden mainstream media switched to, wait, this isn't just cat videos. This is very dangerous. They're taking our profits. I mean, we're really worried about the audience. Oh, sure you are, buddy, right? And so whenever I see mainstream media attacking Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, etc., they're just attacking their competitors. It's obvious, it's actually brazen, but since the people watching them don't know that they're watching propaganda, they don't know that. They're the only people in America that don't know that. Anyways, one last thing that's important. Corporate media, I think, also ruined the word moderate. They ruined a lot of words like moderate, mainstream, centrist, because they took something that is not moderate, like Joe Manchin's positions, where he agrees with Republicans, they're radical. Like he's against paid family leave. Paid family leave polls at 84%. His position is at most 16%. That is a radical position. But if you read the New York Times or you watch CNN, he's called moderate or centrist every single time. When his positions on issue by issue are almost all radical, they're just radically pro-corporate. And so I think one of the reasons people are afraid to get together now, especially on the left, is nobody wants to be called moderate, because mainstream media turned the word moderate into not something that's reasonable and mainstream, but something that's the most corrupt. What do you think about that?
I absolutely concur, and from a leftist perspective, I think this is the problem when you do the lesser of two evils strategy for 40 or 50 years. I mean, where Ronald Reagan is now to the left of the Democratic Party. He gave millions of undocumented immigrants legal path to immigration, passed an assault weapons ban, passed abortion ban as governor. These are things a Republican could never get away with now. That's how far right we've gone. And I think the media always fetishizes this center. Like, we need centrist politics, we need bipartisanship in Congress. The average person is not sitting around their dinner table starving, trying to make ends meet, wishing that there was more bipartisanship in Congress. They're wishing for policies that will impact their lives and improve the quality of life for them and their community. And so I think news media needs to have those narratives, and something you said earlier, I think would help audiences recognize that, which is one of the things I've been a big advocate for in my career. Is I would like to see more access to media literacy education. I'd like to see us in our education system and our communities treat media the same way we treat the quote unquote classics like Shakespeare, novels, or books. I would like to see us teach our citizenry to analyze all media that same way, so they can see why a corporate media news segment paid for by corporate dollars, it has a message that benefits corporate sponsors, it has a political message associated with it. And when you're able to recognize that, you become much more of a savvy citizen. So adding to our discussion here today, in addition to the positive changes in media, I'd like to see increased changes to our education system, whether formally or informally, to give more media literacy skills to the citizenry.
I mean, look, I wrote a book called Justice Coming, and chapter 5 is called The Matrix, and it's all about corporate media. The reason why I focus on that so much is because you're right. With what you suggest in education would be fantastic, and it should apply to our network as much as any network. Make sure you verify. Make sure you check a couple of sources. Don't just take what somebody says for granted. Just because somebody said it on air doesn't mean it's true. And by the way, they might be leaving out critical parts. Omission is one of the key ways that media uses to mislead you. That's a mainstream media go-to move. That's their favorite move in the world, is leaving out critical facts to give you a misleading sense of what's happening. But Nolan, in order to do that, you have to get past the media, because the minute you propose that in any curriculum in the country, both mainstream media and right-wing media will rip your head off. Right-wing media will say, oh, you're doing propaganda and teaching people not to watch Fox News. And mainstream media will say, oh, what do you mean analyze media? This feels like the government is censoring and is against freedom of the press, right? No, we're just teaching people not to believe your propaganda. But that's why they'll fight you tooth and nail, and it'll be near impossible to pass. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, no, that's what's happened in our careers. We always say we like to teach people how to think, not what to think, and we work with people across the ideological spectrum to break down media content. But even if you don't come at it from a media literacy angle, what I've found, at least anecdotally in my career, is people in media are really resistant to the idea of analyzing media. So that's something I think that's baked into the cake. But at least if you go to teachers, or you go to schools, or go to parents, there's certainly a hunger for it. And so I think advocating for that in these media spaces we were discussing here tonight, I think is really critical. And we can do some substantive work by just reminding people that there are folks who do this work. It's volunteer, a lot of nonprofit, free resources folks can use to better understand the media content they use.
No, it's a great point, and I don't want people to get discouraged, because Nolan is making a really good point there, because a lot of the school districts are just local elections, and so the school boards and stuff. And so the right wing tried to take it over to lead in my opinion, a hateful direction and not the right way in regards to taking out LGBTQ books and books about race, etc. But you could do it in a positive way, and you could go in and say, hey, this is not bias. We're not trying to teach you left-wing media or right-wing media, or certainly not corporate media. We just want our teachers in our neck of the woods. It doesn't have to apply to the whole country, but in our district, we want to teach media literacy so that our kids double check what they learn, right? And that would be amazing. And so I would definitely encourage people to do that. And maybe that also goes viral. That would be a dream. That would be a hope. And we're an exception here at TYT, as usual, to the rest of the media. Of course, you should also double check us. Of course, you should do media literacy about us as well as everyone else. Of course, you should be skeptical about what you're seeing and make sure that it's actually verifiable facts and is related to objective reality. And unfortunately, tons of the rest of the media just don't believe in that. And so Everybody check it out. And by the way, check out those different parts, check us out, and make up your own mind. I think that everybody would agree with that. And the other thing to check out, of course, is Nolan's book, Let's Agree to Disagree, a Critical Thinking Guide to Communication, Conflict Management, and Critical Media Literacy. Dr. Nolan Higdon, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Hey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.